You have come here because something in you knows that the things you refuse to see will one day come to claim you. This is not a threat, it is a law of the psyche. The shadow you ignore does not disappear. It gathers power in silence. It waits in the corridors of your unconscious, patient as the night. And when the hour is ripe, when you are most convinced that you have left your darkness behind, it will step forward and demand your recognition. Many believe they can escape this confrontation by distracting themselves with light, by filling their lives with noise and noble ideas. But the shadow is not impressed by such tricks. It is part of you, as much as your heartbeat, and if you deny it, you deny half of your own being. When I speak of the shadow, I do not mean merely the faults or flaws you would prefer to hide from others. It is not just the bundle of shame in guilt and moral failure. It is every unacknowledged potential, every instinct repressed, every truth about yourself you have decided is unacceptable. It is the twin you do not want to introduce to polite society. It is as capable of destruction as it is of transformation. And its nature depends entirely on whether you choose to know it or pretend it does not exist. This is why I call it a final warning, because the longer you resist, the more catastrophic the meeting becomes. Imagine a dream in which you are walking down a dim hallway, doors line each side, most locked, some slightly ajar. You avoid the darker ones, the ones from which a faint breath of cold air emerges. Yet the further you walk, the narrower the corridor becomes, and soon there is only one door left, wide open, as if inviting you in. Inside stands a figure, neither friend nor foe, yet unbearably familiar. The air thickens, your pulse quickens. You realize this figure knows everything about you, your secrets, your wounds, in your desires. And it is smiling. That is your shadow. It is not here to annihilate you. It is here to show you what you have been unwilling to admit. But if you turn away now, if you slam the door and run, you do not escape. You only guarantee that this figure will find another way into your life. Through a lover's betrayal, a sudden compulsion, a self-sabotage that feels inexplicable. We live in a culture that tells you to be positive, to move on, to let go of what hurts. But the psyche does not obey these superficial commands. It is not a servant to your will, it is the totality of your being, conscious and unconscious alike. You may persuade your mind to look away, but the unconscious does not forget. What is repressed is not erased. It is stored in the deep archives of your soul, and there it grows in density. The energy you refuse to integrate finds its own channels through dreams, symptoms, projections. You may find yourself despising someone for reasons you cannot explain, only to discover later that they embody a trait you have buried within yourself. The judgment you cast upon them is the mirror you have refused to look into. The shadow is not merely personal. There is a collective shadow as well. The reservoir of all that humanity disowns. Wars erupt not simply because of political conflict, but because nations project their denied qualities onto one another, seeing the enemy as the embodiment of their own unacknowledged aggression or greed. Families do the same. assigning the role of scapegoat to one member who must carry the hidden shame of the whole. You may have been that scapegoat, or you may have unconsciously made someone else carry the weight you did not wish to bear. In either case, the wound is the same. It is the refusal to own what is ours. There is a peculiar danger in believing that you are good without shadow. Such purity is a myth, and those who cling to it are the ones most likely to cause harm while convinced of their virtue. The Inquisition burned heretics for the sake of God's love. Parents crushed their children's spirit for their own good. The light that refuses to acknowledge darkness becomes blinding, not illuminating. This is why I urge you to remember, the shadow is not evil in itself. What is evil is the denial of it. When you deny, you act blindly. When you act blindly, you become capable of the very cruelty you condemn in others. I have met people in the consulting room whose lives were outwardly successful, yet inside they were haunted by a vague unease. They could not explain why joy felt fleeting, why relationships seemed to collapse in repetition, why certain dreams left them trembling. And when we traced the thread, it led always to some long-forgotten chamber of the soul, a childhood humiliation, a forbidden desire, an unexpressed rage. These were not simply memories, they were living forces, sealed away but never dead, once acknowledged, once given a voice. These forces transformed. The rage became courage, the humiliation became empathy, the desire became creative fire. But until that meeting occurred, the shadow remained a saboteur, undermining every attempt at peace. You cannot bargain with the shadow. You cannot say, I will acknowledge only this much and keep the rest locked away. The unconscious is not fooled by half measures. It demands the whole truth. This is why dreams so often present us with exaggerated, even grotesque images. They are trying to break through our polite resistance. A snake in the bed, a dead relative speaking in riddles, a dark figure following you through a forest. These are not random hallucinations. They are the symbolic language of the psyche, calling you to turn and face what you would rather not see. The snake may be your instinctual wisdom, buried under moral fear. The dead relative may be an aspect of your lineage you must integrate. The figure in the forest may be the part of you that knows the way through the unknown. But if you wake in panic and dismiss it all as just a dream, you miss the invitation. Some of you fear that facing the shadow will destroy you. In truth, it will destroy only the illusion you have mistaken for yourself. It will strip away the borrowed identities, the masks you crafted to please others or protect yourself. This process can feel like death because the ego resists surrender, yet beyond that death is the greater life of the self, the wholeness that includes both light and dark. Without the shadow, you are incomplete, and an incomplete life is a half-lived one. I will tell you this, the shadow that will break you if you ignore it is often the one that holds your greatest gift. The artist's shadow may be their rage against mediocrity, which, when integrated, becomes the fuel for uncompromising vision. The healer's shadow may be their own deep wound, which, when accepted, grants them compassion without condescension. The leader's shadow may be their lust for power, which, when brought into consciousness, becomes the capacity to wield influence with integrity. What you fear most in yourself may be the key you have been searching for, but you will never know if you continue to run. You see, the greatest mistake one can make is to believe the shadow is an intruder rather than a native of the soul. We speak of it as if it were an invader, something foreign, something that does not belong, but the truth is that it was born with you. It grew alongside your conscious personality, shaped by every choice you made about who you thought you were allowed to be. Every time you said, "This is me," or "This is not me," you were shaping not only the self you showed to the world, but the self you exiled into darkness. And so your shadow carries the life you refuse to live. It holds the gestures you suppressed, the words you swallowed, the love you did not allow yourself to feel, the aggression you were told was wrong, the talents you doubted you deserved to use. It is your unlived life, and it will haunt you until you turn around and say, "I see you. The ancients understood this better than we do. They told stories of underworld journeys, of heroes who descended into darkness, not to escape it, but to retrieve something vital, a treasure, a captive soul, a secret that would restore balance to the world." Orpheus enters the shadow realm to find Eurydice. Inanna descends to her sister Ereshkigal and is stripped of her royal garments until she stands naked before death itself. Christ spends 3 days in the tomb, descending into hell before rising. These are not just religious tales, they are maps of the human psyche. They remind us that the path to wholeness always passes through the places we fear to go. To refuse the descent is to refuse the fullness of life. In the modern world, we do not send people into temples of initiation or into caves to meet their shadow. We have made the underworld invisible, yet it is everywhere in our compulsions, in the people who trigger us most violently, in the dreams that disturb us, in the patterns that repeat no matter how hard we try to break them. You may change cities, lovers, careers, beliefs, but if you have not faced your shadow, you will find it waiting for you in the new place, wearing a new face, speaking with a voice you recognize but do not want to name. Many come to me in despair, convinced that life has turned against them. They speak of betrayal, of sudden losses, of strange obstacles that appear just when things seem to be going well. They imagine that fate has singled them out for punishment, but I have learned to listen between their words. Often what they call misfortune is the unconscious insisting on being heard. The partner who leaves them embodies a need for self-reliance they have ignored. The career that collapses forces them to discover a vocation closer to the soul. The illness that incapacitates them brings them into contact with a vulnerability they have never allowed themselves to feel. The shadow can be ruthless, but its aim is not to destroy it, is to awaken. We cannot forget that the shadow is bound to the archetype of the trickster. It will not simply knock politely on your door and wait for you to invite it in. It will take the form of accidents, coincidences, sudden passions, and irrational fears. It will test your pride by making you fall, test your control by placing you in chaos. Test your identity by presenting you with someone who mirrors everything you deny about yourself. If you meet these moments with bitterness, you prolong your exile from yourself. If you meet them with curiosity, even trembling curiosity, and you open the way for transformation. In dreams, the shadow often appears as the same sex as the dreamer, a figure whose presence makes you uneasy. It may be someone you know but have mixed feelings about. It may be a stranger with a piercing gaze. Sometimes it is grotesque or monstrous because the psyche uses exaggerated forms to bypass your resistance. When you dream of this figure, ask yourself, what part of me does this represent? What qualities do they carry that I have refused to own? This is not about approving of these qualities, some may be dangerous if left unconscious, but about recognizing that they are yours. Ownership is the first step to mastery, and here is the paradox. The more you integrate your shadow, the less power it has to harm you. Yet, the more power it grants you to live fully. Power here does not mean domination over others, but authority over yourself. It is the capacity to stand in your truth without fear of being exposed, because you have already exposed yourself to yourself. This is the freedom that comes when there is no longer any part of you waiting in ambush to sabotage you. The shadow becomes your ally, your guide, your guardian at the threshold of deeper mysteries. Yet, if you ignore it, if you pretend that your light is enough, then the shadow becomes the very thing that will break you. Not because it wishes to, but because a house divided cannot stand. Your conscious and unconscious selves are meant to work together. When they are split, your energy is split. You are torn between the life you perform and the life you suppress. This division leads to exhaustion, depression, and a subtle sense of meaninglessness. You may achieve outward success, but inside you will feel hollow, and the hollowness will grow until something, an event, a crisis, a breakdown forces you to confront what you have tried to bury. Do not mistake this warning for a prophecy of doom. It is an invitation. You are not here merely to survive. You are here to become whole. Wholeness is not perfection, it is integration. It is the art of standing in the center of your being, able to hold both the beauty and the terror of what you are without needing to exile either. It is the recognition that the darkness you fear may be the womb of your next creation. It is the courage to say to your shadow, I will not run from you anymore. There is a reason why the shadow often reveals itself most clearly in relationships. Alone, you may be able to maintain the illusion of your constructed self. You can curate your words, control your reactions, choose only the environments that affirm who you think you are. But in the presence of another, especially someone who matters to you, the unconscious begins to stir. Love and intimacy are among the most potent mirrors, for they draw the shadow to the surface as surely as the moon pulls the tide. The traits you admire in another are often the unclaimed parts of your own light. The traits you despise are often the unclaimed parts of your own darkness. You believe you have discovered them in the other person, but in truth, you have found a reflection. This is the law of projection, and it is one of the ways the shadow forces you to meet yourself. I have seen how this law operates with ruthless precision. A man who prides himself on his honesty becomes obsessed with exposing the deceit of others. Unaware that his own life is riddled with small, convenient lies he refuses to acknowledge. A woman who sees herself as endlessly compassionate finds herself entangled with people who exploit her, not realizing that she has repressed her own healthy aggression, her own capacity to say no. A person convinced of their humility becomes sharply judgmental of anyone they perceive as arrogant, blind to the quiet superiority they themselves carry in their virtue. In each case, the shadow is not a distant enemy, it is the unseen twin, living in the reflection of those they cannot bear to understand. The danger is that projection feels convincing. When you are in its grip, you will swear the fault truly lies outside of you. This is why shadow work demands radical humility. It requires the willingness to pause in the moment of judgment and ask, what in me is being revealed here? Why does this trait provoke such intensity in me? Sometimes the answer is uncomfortable, even humiliating, but it is also liberating, for every projection reclaimed is a piece of your power returned. When you stop needing the world to carry your disowned parts, you begin to see people as they are, not as screens for your inner dramas. But the shadow is not content to reveal itself only in personal relationships. It will also appear in your relationship with life itself. There are seasons when everything seems to turn against you. The plans that once felt certain begin to dissolve. Friends drift away. Health falters. The world you built starts to crumble. It is easy in such times to feel cursed, to believe that fate is cruel or that some unseen hand has singled you out for suffering. Yet, if you look closely, you will often find that these crises are the very events that bring your shadow into view. They strip away the distractions, the busyness, the masks you wear, until you are left face to face with a part of yourself you have ignored. You may remember such a season in your own life. Perhaps you lost a job and felt as if the ground had vanished beneath you. At first, the fear was all-consuming, but in the quiet that followed, you heard a faint, persistent voice, one that had been drowned out for years, telling you to pursue a path you had long dismissed as impractical or foolish. That voice was your shadow speaking, not as an enemy, but as a keeper of your unlived life. Or perhaps you endured the end of a relationship that shattered your idea of who you were. In the grief, you came to see how much of your identity had been built on pleasing another, on avoiding abandonment at the cost of your own truth. That realization was a shadow handing you back the keys to yourself. You must understand, the shadow is not just a collection of your worst qualities. It is also the reservoir of your deepest instincts, your most primal vitality. The same energy that can destroy you when repressed can save you when integrated. The rage you fear might become the fire that burns away your passivity. The envy you deny might reveal the life you secretly long to create. The lust you shame might awaken a fuller connection to your body and your senses. This is why ignoring the shadow is so dangerous. It is not only a refusal to face your darkness, but a refusal to receive your own strength. The spiritual path is not exempt from the shadow's demands. In fact, the more one seeks the light, the more the shadow asserts itself. Mystics throughout history have spoken of the dark night of the soul, that period when God seems absent and the soul is plunged into emptiness. This is not a punishment. It is an initiation. The light you see cannot be reached by bypassing your darkness. You must carry the shadow with you, for it is part of the whole. Those who attempt to ascend without this integration often fall prey to spiritual inflation, believing themselves to be above human flaws, imagining that they have transcended the shadow, only to be undone by it in the end. The work, then, is not to eliminate the shadow, but to enter into dialogue with it. This is a sacred conversation, one in which you agree to stop pretending that you are only the mask you wear. It begins in small acts, admitting your jealousy instead of dressing it in noble words, acknowledging your fear without disguising it as reason, confessing your hunger for recognition rather than hiding it behind false modesty. Each time you do this, you take a step toward wholeness. Each time you refuse, the shadow grows a little stronger in the dark. There is a subtle shift that happens once you begin to honor the shadow's role. You stop fearing the moments when life brings you to your knees. You start to recognize them as thresholds, as invitations to retrieve another fragment of yourself. Even the breaking becomes sacred, for you know it is making space for something more real to emerge. This is not the end of suffering, but it is the end of meaningless suffering. Pain without consciousness is torment. Pain with consciousness is transformation. There comes a moment, if you walk far enough into yourself, when the shadow stops lurking at the edge and steps into the center. It will no longer appear as a fleeting image in dreams, nor as a passing irritation in the people around you. It will stand before you as an undeniable presence. This is the hour of symbolic death, when the identity you have carried, like armor, begins to crack. You may feel as if you are unraveling, as if the very structure of your being is dissolving, and in a sense, it is. The ego, your familiar sense of I, has been the ruler of your inner kingdom for so long that it believes itself to be the whole. The shadow arrives to correct that illusion. In this hour, it is common to resist with all your strength. You will cling to old habits, seek the safety of familiar thoughts, retreat into the well-worn roles that once brought you approval or control. But these defenses will not hold. The shadow does not negotiate with half-truths. It will pull from you the fragments you have hidden, one by one, until you are stripped to the essence. What is being destroyed is not your soul. It is the false architecture you built around it. This process has been described in every mythic tradition, for the human psyche has always known it must pass through a kind of death to be reborn. In alchemy, it is the nigredo, the blackening, when the material is reduced to a formless state. In the mysteries of Osiris, it is the dismemberment before the reassembly into a more complete form. In the shamanic journey, it is the ritual of being taken apart and reconstituted so that the initiate returns with power they could not have carried before. These are not stories of comfort. They are maps for the necessary breaking. When you meet your shadow fully, you may experience emotions you thought you had conquered long ago. Grief will rise from the depths, not just for what you have lost in life, but for the years you lost to living in fragments. Rage may shake you, and if you do not flee from it, you will see that beneath it lies a long-buried refusal to be diminished. Shame will visit you, but if you hold its gaze, it will reveal itself as the echo of someone else's judgment you mistook for truth. Each of these emotions is a guide. Each points to a piece of yourself waiting to be reclaimed, and then something extraordinary happens. The fear that once defined your relationship to the shadow begins to dissolve. You realize that you can endure its presence, that it is not the monster you were taught to believe it was. You see that it carries memories, instincts, desires that were never meant to be erased, only understood, only integrated. This is when the shadow begins to change shape. It no longer stalks you from the dark, it walks beside you. It speaks in dreams, not to frighten you, but to guide you. It warns you when you are betraying yourself, and it reminds you when you are ready to step into a larger life. In this rebirth, your sense of self shifts from the brittle structure of ego to the deeper ground of the self. The self is not just the sum of your conscious choices. It is the totality of your being, the union of what you have embraced and what you have feared. To live from this center is to move with a different kind of authority, one that does not depend on masks. You no longer need to present yourself as better than you are, nor to hide the parts that might make others uncomfortable. You become transparent to yourself, and in that transparency, others sense a presence that cannot be faked. But I must warn you, integration is not a one-time event. The shadow will visit you again and again, each time carrying something new from the depths. You may think you have mastered it, only to be humbled by its next appearance. This is not failure. It is the rhythm of the psyche's unfolding. The self is infinite in its layers, and the shadow is the emissary that brings each layer into light. When you are ready, the final warning is not to treat this as a task to be completed, but as a lifelong relationship. What changes after such an encounter is not that life becomes easier, but that you are no longer at war with yourself. You still feel fear, but you no longer mistake it for weakness. You still experience anger, but you recognize it as a signal, not a sin. You still grieve, but you no longer drown in it, for you have touched the part of you that cannot be destroyed. This is the resilience born of wholeness, not the brittle optimism of denial, but the steady strength of one who has faced the abyss and returned. When you live this way, you become dangerous in the most beautiful sense. Dangerous to falsehood, to manipulation, to the forces within and without that. Depend on your unconsciousness to thrive. You become a living reminder to others that they too can turn and face what they fear. You carry the gravity of one who has been tempered in the fire, and your presence, without words, invites the people around you to begin their own descent. This is the work the shadow asks of you, not that you eliminate it, but that you learn to walk with it. If you ignore it, it will break you in ways that feel senseless, leaving you shattered without understanding why. But if you turn toward it, if you give it your full attention, it will break you open in a way that lets the deeper life pour through. That is the difference between destruction and transformation, and that is why I call this my final warning, because you cannot postpone this forever. The meeting is inevitable. The choice is whether you will walk into that meeting with open eyes or be dragged into it blind. There will come a day when you look back and realize that every collapse, every betrayal, every night when you thought you could not go on was in truth, a signal flare from the part of you you had abandoned. What you thought was punishment was preparation. The shadow was shaping the ground beneath you, forcing cracks in the walls you built so the light of your deeper being could enter. You may think now that you are too fragile for such a meeting, but understand this. Fragility is not the same as weakness. Glass is fragile because it is rigid. It shatters when pressure comes, but a living branch bends and returns to form because it carries its roots deep into the soil. Integration gives you roots. Before that, you are only glass transparent in moments, but easily broken. When I speak of roots, I mean the connection to the self, the center that holds all opposites. Without this center, you are tossed between poles, love and hate, pride and shame, control and chaos, without knowing that each is part of the same whole. The shadow carries one pole. The conscious self carries the other. Only in the meeting do they form a unity. Without this unity, you will continue to seek your missing parts in others, handing them the power to complete you or to destroy you. And when they inevitably fail to hold the pieces you have refused to claim, you will call it tragedy, not recognizing it as the shadow's work. This is why love can be so perilous and so necessary. It draws the unconscious to the surface with a speed and intensity nothing else can match. The very act of loving someone strips away your defenses and leaves you vulnerable not only to them, but to yourself. When you find yourself irrationally jealous, inexplicably drawn to someone you shouldn't want, or consumed by the fear of abandonment, do not be too quick to judge the emotion as wrong. Instead, ask what it reveals about the part of you you have left in exile. The shadow often rides into your life on the back of desire. If you can look past the object of the desire to the energy beneath it, you will see the map the unconscious is laying at your feet. And yet, there are times when the shadow will not whisper, will not nudge, it will roar. It will take the form of a crisis that feels unbearable. You may lose what you love most. You may find yourself alone when you thought you would always be accompanied. You may watch the life you built crumble to dust. These are the moments when you will be tempted to curse the darkness, to reject it entirely. But if you can summon the courage to remain present, if you can sit with the ruin without rushing to rebuild, you may begin to see the contours of a truer life emerging. The shadow has no interest in preserving your illusions. It seeks only to restore your wholeness. Sometimes the only way to do that is to take from you the things that keep you divided. I know this is not a comforting truth. It will not soothe the part of you that wants guarantees, that wants a clear path without risk. But the soul does not grow in comfort. It grows in the tension between what you are and what you could become. The shadow is that tension given form. It is the guardian at the threshold, testing whether you are ready to step beyond the boundaries of your old life. If you refuse, you will remain where you are safe, perhaps, but stagnant. If you accept, you step into the unknown, where nothing is promised and everything is possible. In the end, the choice is not between light and dark, but between unconsciousness and awareness. Darkness held in awareness becomes fertile soil. Light without awareness becomes a glare that blinds you To integrate the shadow is to hold both in balance, to walk with one foot in the day and one foot in the night, knowing you belong to both. This is not the path for the faint of heart, but it is the only path that leads to the self, and the self is the only place where you can stand without fear of being undone. For there is nothing left to undo. So I give you this final warning. If you turn away from the shadow, it will come for you in ways you cannot predict, through loss, through illness, through the betrayal of others or of yourself. But if you turn toward it, if you agree to see what you have feared, you will discover that it is not here to destroy you. It is here to break you open to the fullness of what you are. Do not wait for the crisis to force this meeting. Begin now, in the small, honest moments, in the quiet admissions you make to yourself when no one is watching. Every act of truth you allow is a step toward wholeness. And when, at last, you stand in that place where nothing in you is foreign, where every voice within has found its place in the chorus, you will understand why the shadow had to follow you so long. You will see that it was not your enemy, but your oldest companion, carrying the parts of you you were not yet ready to love. And perhaps in that moment you will thank it, not because it spared you from breaking, but because it broke you in the only way that could set you free